Look at the glittering skyline from 1,000 feet in the air, and you will see a miracle of modern engineering. The brochures promise a paradise carved from the desert, a seamless ecosystem of luxury, innovation, and climate control. But the camera drone, zooming over the glass towers, is only capturing an optical illusion. If you lower your perspective, if you drop down from the clouds and stand on the concrete pavement at street level, the narrative changes entirely. The polished image shatters against a wall of invisible, suffocating reality. You are no longer looking at a city. You are standing inside a thermodynamic engine that is slowly choking on its own exhaust. The official weather stations might broadcast a manageable temperature, but the true climate of this city is not measured in the shade. It is measured on the asphalt, where the air stops moving, where the carbon pools, and where the heat is weaponized. Looking from above is a miracle. But at ground level, it is a suffocating machine. The weather application on a smartphone is a comforting lie. It tells tourists stepping out of the airport that the temperature is 38 degrees Celsius, perhaps 40 on a midsummer afternoon. That number is recorded in controlled environments, elevated above the ground, shielded from direct radiation. It is a meteorological technicality designed to keep the aviation and hospitality sectors operating without panic. The physical reality of the street is profoundly different. If you equip a lens with a thermal sensor and point it at the concrete walkways, the screen does not show a normal urban landscape. The entire pavement bleeds into aggressive shades of deep red and blinding yellow. This thermal imaging reveals the invisible truth of the urban center. The asphalt is absorbing the relentless solar radiation all day and storing it like a massive geological battery. By 2 in the afternoon, the surface temperature of the street is not 38 degrees. It easily surpasses 49 degrees Celsius, breaking 120 degrees Fahrenheit. At this specific temperature threshold, the physical properties of the environment begin to mutate. The air density drops, the ambient moisture turns into a heavy vapor, and the concrete radiates heat upwards, baking everything in its path. You are not just dealing with the sun from above. You are being aggressively microwaved from below. Tourists step out of heavily air-conditioned hotel lobbies expecting a harsh but natural desert breeze. Instead, they are hit by a physical wall of artificial heat. The luxury resorts, the high-end restaurants, the premium retail outlets, they all exist as isolated islands of cold air surrounded by an ocean of lethal, radiant energy. The thermal camera exposes the fundamental vulnerability of this environment. The red and yellow gradients moving across the screen map out a hostile territory where human biology is pushed to its absolute limits. The city planners designed a futuristic utopia, but the physics of extreme heat do not care about architectural ambition. The ground is boiling, and the heat has nowhere to go. To understand why this heat cannot escape, you have to look at the geometry of the city itself. The concept of an urban canyon is well documented in city planning. When you build massive skyscrapers tightly packed together, you create deep, narrow valleys made of steel, concrete, and reflective glass. In a temperate climate, these canyons can create wind tunnels. In this specific desert metropolis, they act as vertical ovens. The glass facades of the luxury towers are designed to reflect solar radiation away from the indoor spaces. This is highly efficient for the interior, but it creates a devastating external consequence. The reflected sunlight bounces off one glass tower, hits the tower across the street, and ricochets down into the pedestrian walkways. The sunlight is multiplied, magnified, and focused directly into the urban canyon. Furthermore, these massive architectural walls completely block the natural sea breeze that would normally sweep across the coastline to cool the land. The natural ventilation of the desert geography has been structurally amputated. The air inside these artificial canyons becomes totally stagnant. It does not circulate, it does not refresh, and it does not cool down. The heat is trapped between the towering walls, bouncing back and forth in a relentless cycle of thermal escalation. The street level becomes a pressurized chamber. Every passing hour of sunlight adds more thermal energy to the canyon, and the dense arrangement of the buildings ensures that 0% of that energy is dispersed. This is not an accidental oversight in zoning laws. It is the inevitable mathematical result of maximizing premium real estate square footage. The towers were built to house thousands of people in total comfort, stacking luxury upon luxury into the sky. But by doing so, the architects inadvertently engineered an inescapable trap for the heat. The very structures that signify immense wealth and economic power are the exact same structures suffocating the streets below. We must now shift our focus inside one of these massive glass towers. Step through the revolving doors of a 5-star hotel or a premium shopping mall, and the atmosphere instantly transforms. The temperature drops to a perfectly maintained 22 degrees Celsius. The humidity is stripped from the air, leaving a crisp, refreshing microclimate. It is a masterpiece of modern climate control. It feels like magic, but magic does not exist in physics. Thermodynamics dictates a brutal, unbreakable rule. You cannot simply create cold air out of nothing. You can only move heat from one place to another. The massive heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, known as HVAC, do not generate coolness. They are essentially giant thermal vacuums. They suck the heat out of the indoor air, compress it, transfer it to a chemical refrigerant, and then forcibly pump that collected heat outside. Every single degree of cooling achieved inside a luxury boutique requires a proportional, and often greater, amount of heat to be violently expelled into the outdoor environment. This is the paradox of coolness. The absolute comfort of the indoor population is directly subsidized by the thermal destruction of the outdoor environment. The magnificent chill of the hotel lobby is paid for by the boiling temperature of the street. Millions of tons of indoor air are constantly being refrigerated, meaning millions of tons of waste heat are constantly being vomited into the already stagnant urban canyons. When you look at the towering skyline, you are not just looking at buildings. You are looking at thousands of massive, industrial-scale heat engines running at maximum capacity. They are extracting the desert heat from their luxurious interiors and dumping it mercilessly onto the heads of anyone unfortunate enough to be walking on the pavement. The perfectly chilled restaurant dining room guarantees that the pavement outside that restaurant is lethally hot. This mechanical extraction of heat creates a terrifying thermodynamic feedback loop. It is a cycle of escalating pressure that pushes the entire urban infrastructure toward a critical vulnerability. As the millions of HVAC units dump their waste heat into the stagnant urban canyons, the baseline temperature of the street rises significantly. The air outside the buildings becomes artificially hotter than the natural desert climate. Now, the cooling towers and compressor units situated on the roofs and in the alleyways have to work with this superheated outdoor air. An air conditioning system is designed to reject heat into the ambient air, but when the ambient air is already 49 degrees Celsius, the system struggles. The heat exchange process loses its efficiency. The compressors have to run longer, spin faster, and draw significantly more electrical power to achieve the exact same amount of indoor cooling. This massive spike in electrical consumption requires the power grids to work harder, which generates more heat at the substations. More importantly, because the HVAC units are working harder, they become hotter, and they exhaust even more thermal energy back into the street. It is a vicious, inescapable circle. The street gets hotter, so the air conditioning works harder, which makes the street even hotter, which forces the air conditioning to work even harder. If you track this energy flow with a thermal sensor, you do not just see red and yellow static images. You see a pulsating, aggressive radiation expanding from every exhaust vent, bleeding down the walls and saturating the pavement. It is a thermodynamic bomb, constantly detonating in slow motion. The city is locked in a relentless battle against its own exhaust. The infrastructure is forced to consume astronomical amounts of energy simply to counteract the artificial heat it just created. This is not sustainable growth. This is a system cannibalizing its own efficiency just to survive the afternoon. As the mechanical exhaust floods the streets and the urban canyon traps the radiation, a bizarre meteorological phenomenon occurs. Normally, basic physics dictates that hot air rises. The heat generated at street level should theoretically float up and disperse into the upper atmosphere, providing some relief to the ground. But the immense scale of this concentrated heat generation completely breaks the normal atmospheric rules. The millions of HVAC units, the millions of cars, and the boiling concrete create such an extreme volume of superheated air that it alters the microclimate above the city. This leads to a severe temperature inversion. A massive, dense layer of extremely hot air forms a few hundred feet above the skyscrapers, sitting heavily over the entire metropolitan area. Instead of rising and dissipating, this atmospheric layer acts like a colossal, invisible glass lid. It caps the urban canyons. It seals the city inside its own thermal footprint. Any cooler air coming from the ocean is pushed over the top of this dome, completely bypassing the streets below. The temperature inversion traps everything underneath it in a high-pressure oven. The heat cannot radiate into space. The humidity from the Persian Gulf rolls in, hits this thermal dome, and is compressed down into the streets, turning the dry heat into a suffocating, dense atmospheric soup. The illusion of an open sky is just that, an illusion. Structurally, the residents and tourists are walking around inside a sealed greenhouse. The city planners built the towers, but the thermodynamics built the roof. This invisible lid ensures that the thermal feedback loop we just discussed has absolutely no pressure release valve. The heat is trapped, the humidity is trapped, and as we are about to see, the chemical byproducts of this massive urban engine are also trapped. This brings us to the most suffocating reality of the street-level environment. Because the invisible thermal lid caps the city, and the urban canyons block the wind, the heat is not the only thing that cannot escape. The chemical emissions, the particulate matter, the vast quantities of carbon dioxide are all forced to pool at the bottom of the canyons. Consider the sheer volume of combustion required to keep this city moving. Hundreds of thousands of luxury vehicles, heavy-duty delivery trucks supplying the massive hotel buffets, and construction equipment all continuously pump exhaust into the air. In a normal city, this carbon footprint would disperse. Here, it is pushed down by the temperature inversion and trapped by the stagnant heat. The 49-degree air becomes thick, heavy, and highly toxic. The carbon molecules vibrate violently in the extreme heat, absorbing even more infrared radiation, acting as microscopic thermal batteries floating in the air you breathe. You have the exhaust from the cars. You have the microplastics degrading from the tires, melting on the scorching asphalt. You have the fine dust blowing in from the desert. And you have the endless chemical exhaust from the industrial chillers. All of this material is locked together in a stagnant, boiling chemical soup. When you walk down the street, you are not breathing air. You are inhaling the concentrated, heavily pressurized exhaust of a luxury economy. The physical sensation is overwhelming. The air feels heavy in the lungs. The skin is coated in a sticky film of humidity and particulate matter, and the eyes sting from the invisible carbon density. The visual clarity of the city diminishes at ground level, blurred by the heat haze and the trapped smog. It is a state of absolute, undeniable suffocation. The glittering image of the metropolis completely dissolves when you are forced to breathe its heavy, contaminated atmosphere. The consequences of this extreme physical reality extend far beyond physical discomfort. They create a massive, expanding economic vacuum at the ground level of the city. In any traditional urban economy, the street level is the most valuable commercial real estate. It is where cafe culture thrives, where tourists explore on foot, where spontaneous retail transactions occur. But in this environment, the public space has been effectively murdered by the heat. The sidewalks are completely empty. The pedestrian infrastructure is essentially a dead zone for 6 to 8 months of the year. A restaurant investor might pay millions of dollars for a premium ground floor location with a beautiful outdoor terrace. But because of the trapped carbon, the HVAC exhaust, and the 49-degree asphalt, that terrace is completely useless. It generates zero revenue. The hospitality sector faces a brutal economic pressure. They are paying premium real estate prices for square footage that physically cannot be occupied by humans. The entire concept of walking from one shop to another is eliminated. The human population is forced to move exclusively inside climate-controlled tubes, from the air-conditioned apartment to the air-conditioned car to the air-conditioned subterranean parking garage and into the air-conditioned mall. This completely severs the organic flow of a city. Small businesses that rely on foot traffic face incredible financial vulnerability. The economic activity is violently sucked upward into the enclosed malls and the isolated hotel towers. Billions of dollars in ground-level real estate investment are slowly evaporating because the physical environment is simply too hostile to support human commerce. The city is wealthy, yes, but it is spending an astronomical amount of that wealth simply to maintain the illusion that it is a functional place to live, while the actual streets sit totally abandoned under the crushing weight of the artificial heat. This relentless battle to maintain the indoor illusion leads directly to a profound systemic risk. We must examine the mechanical fatigue of the infrastructure itself. The entire survival of this urban model depends on a single, continuous, unbroken supply of electrical cooling. The HVAC systems, the district cooling plants, the massive water pumps, these are the literal life support machines for the metropolis, and they are exhausted. They are being forced to operate at peak capacity, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in an incredibly hostile, superheated, corrosive environment. The metal components are subjected to continuous thermal expansion and contraction. The compressors are fighting against the immense pressure of the 49-degree ambient air. The physical wear and tear on these machines is staggering. The maintenance costs are astronomical. This is not a theoretical vulnerability. It is a very real, very expensive mechanical reality. The electrical grid must absorb massive spikes in demand every single afternoon just to keep the glass towers from turning into actual greenhouses. The infrastructure is tightly wound, highly stressed, and deeply fragile. If a major substation fails, if a district cooling plant experiences a catastrophic mechanical breakdown during the peak of summer, the consequences would be immediate and severe. Without the constant, forceful extraction of heat, the indoor temperatures inside those glass towers would reach dangerous levels within a matter of hours. The city has engineered itself into a corner where it must constantly outspend and outpower the natural environment, and it must do so without a single moment of interruption. It is a high-stakes gamble against physics, relying on stressed metal and constant electricity to hold back a desert that is patiently waiting to reclaim its territory. The structural vulnerability is hidden behind the beautiful facades, but the machines are screaming. The final verdict is not a matter of opinion, nor is it a subjective criticism of urban aesthetics. It is a strict, undeniable calculation of physics and economics. You cannot outsmart thermodynamics with money. You can build the tallest towers, you can import the most expensive marble, and you can engineer the most powerful cooling systems on the planet. But every action requires an equal and opposite reaction. The absolute luxury, the pristine 22-degree air, and the glittering indoor perfection are all directly funded by the thermal destruction of the outdoor space. The carbon is trapped, the heat is weaponized, and the urban canyon remains a suffocating prison of exhaust. The city has achieved its magnificent illusion, but the price of that illusion is a ground-level reality that is fundamentally hostile to human life. Concrete and glass cannot bend the laws of nature. The internal splendor is eternally paid for by external ruin. The official narratives will continue to highlight the breaking of tourism records and the expansion of the real estate market. The glossy videos will continue to show sweeping aerial shots of the immaculate skyline, bathed in the golden hour light. But true economic analysis requires looking at the hidden costs. The vulnerability of this specific tourism and real estate model lies in its absolute dependence on extreme, continuous energy consumption just to make the environment survivable. When a city requires massive industrial intervention simply to allow people to eat lunch or walk down a street, that city is deeply fragile. The true measure of an urban center is not how well it shines from a distance, but how it functions on the ground. And on the ground, the heat is winning. If you value documentaries that look past the polished marketing brochures and analyze the cold, hard mechanics of global economies, make sure to subscribe to the channel. The next warning sign is rarely where the official narrative tells you to look, and we will be there to uncover it. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on how sustainable this massive artificial cooling model truly is for the next decade. This documentary script provides an analytical perspective based on publicly available data, meteorological principles, and urban planning mechanics at the time of research. Economic conditions, infrastructure developments, and environmental factors are subject to change. This analysis examines systemic pressures and infrastructural models. It is not intended to target any specific demographic, resident, or governing body. Furthermore, the information presented does not constitute personal financial, investment, or travel advice. Certain conclusions are analytical deductions drawn from the thermodynamic and economic variables discussed.